Most people think the way to earn respect is by being nice. Be kind, be patient, be understanding, and people will value you. But the truth is, the more agreeable you are, the more people test your limits, the more you accommodate, the more invisible you become. Everything changes the moment you stop being nice. Not rude, not cruel, but calmly unyielding. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He believed that to command respect, you must create a subtle fear, not through threat, but through clarity and consequence. As he wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved if one must choose." The Stoics took it further, teaching that power comes not from emotion, but from restraint, discipline, and unwavering consistency. When your standards are fixed and your reactions controlled, people learn to self-regulate around you. This video explores the 5 principles for commanding respect, not through force, but through silent authority. If you're tired of being overlooked or taken for granted, this is your turning point. Like and subscribe if you're ready to stop chasing approval and start commanding presence.
Number 1.
Clarity of boundaries. Respect doesn't begin with strength. It begins with clarity. People don't mistreat you because they're evil. They do it because they don't know where your line is. When boundaries are vague, people test, they push, they overstep. Not always from malice, but from instinct. Human nature constantly scans for where resistance ends. And if resistance is absent or inconsistent, what begins as tolerance quickly mutates into exploitation. That's why the Stoics didn't preach about being agreeable. They taught the discipline of definition. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it, and nothing embodies your values more clearly than the boundaries you enforce." A boundary is not a wall, it's a line of clarity. It's the visible structure of what you accept, what you reject, and what you walk away from. If someone crosses that line and you respond with a nervous smile, you've trained them. If they cross and you hesitate to speak, you've told them your peace is negotiable. But if they cross and you respond calmly, firmly, and without apology, you've taught them the limit is real. This is the foundation of commanding respect without creating hate. Be clear, not loud, not aggressive, just unmistakably firm. The Stoic doesn't shout, he doesn't punish, he doesn't over-explain. He speaks once and lets silence carry the weight. The moment you make your expectations visible through consistent action, people begin to regulate themselves. They pause before speaking, they reflect before asking, because deep down, they sense that crossing you has consequences, even if those consequences are simply your withdrawal. And here's where most people collapse. They set boundaries emotionally, not logically. They react when hurt, but stay silent when disrespected. This inconsistency confuses others and erodes your credibility. You must understand, your boundaries are only as strong as your consistency. You don't need to keep reminding people how you want to be treated. You just need to respond the same way every time they don't. Marcus Aurelius lived by this. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't indulge slander. He simply held himself to a higher code and let his behavior define his rule. That's why people respected him, even if they didn't love him. Look closely at the modern world. Every workplace, every relationship, every power dynamic boils down to unspoken lines. Steve Jobs wasn't always liked, but he was rarely disrespected. Why? Because he was clear. If something didn't meet his standards, it was a no. Not cruel, not explained, just no. He didn't dilute his expectations to avoid hurting feelings. He used his boundaries as filters. Those who couldn't align with excellence naturally filtered themselves out. His standards were signals. You either rose to them or you were removed by them. This doesn't mean you have to be harsh. In fact, the most powerful boundaries are delivered with calmness. Not punishment, presence. The energy that says, I know what I accept, and I don't need to convince you of it. That subtle certainty speaks louder than any lecture. When someone challenges your line and sees no emotional wobble, no desperate need to be liked, no flinching, they realize you're not afraid to lose them. That realization alone makes people think twice. And this is the paradox. When you stop trying to be understood, you become clearer. When you stop trying to keep people, you stop losing yourself. The Stoics believed that internal stability was the highest form of freedom. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And bravery, in this context, means the courage to be disliked by those who benefit from your lack of boundaries. Let me give you a personal analogy. Imagine your mind as a city without clear gates and rules. Anyone can walk in. Some enter with respect, others leave trash behind. If you don't enforce structure, your city becomes a dumping ground for other people's noise, chaos, and demands. But the moment you build clean, visible boundaries, who enters, who stays, and how long, they start treating your space like it matters. Because you showed them it matters. Another hidden advantage of clear boundaries is that they simplify life. You stop negotiating your values every day. You stop second-guessing your decisions. You stop replaying conversations in your head, wondering if you said too much or too little. You speak once, you act once, and you let silence take over. That is Stoic leadership, not through control, but through composure. There's something else too. Clarity sharpens your relationships. When people know exactly where you stand, they self-sort. Those who thrive on drama will distance themselves. Those who value order will draw closer. You no longer have to ask where people stand. Their behavior around your boundaries tells you go from emotional detective to rational observer. And this, the Stoics would say, is how one maintains peace, not through isolation, but through discernment. Here's a final test. If your boundaries are clear, people respect your time without reminders. They hesitate before asking for too much. They speak to you with measured tone, not because they fear punishment, but because they recognize structure. Even those who don't like you will still follow your lead. Why? Because clarity creates predictability, and predictability breeds respect. To conclude, clarity of boundaries isn't about building walls. It's about building structure. It's not about being feared through threat, but respected through consistency. You don't need to shout. You don't need to explain. You just need to live the line you've drawn. You'll lose the people who never had respect to begin with, and you'll keep the ones who value self-respect, because they'll recognize it in you. The moment you stop performing and start preserving, the world around you reorganizes itself, not because you forced it, but because you became impossible to ignore.
Number 2.
Cold logic over emotional reaction. If clarity earns you respect, then composure preserves it. In a world addicted to reaction, the calm man is a mystery, and mysteries are powerful. The Stoics taught that emotional control isn't just a personal virtue, it's a social advantage. Why? Because when everyone else is reacting, the person who pauses stands out. The person who breathes before they speak, who waits before they act, who listens while others shout. That person becomes the anchor in the storm. Epictetus warned, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master." That is not poetry, that is a warning. Every time someone provokes you and you explode, you hand them the remote control to your mind. The louder your reaction, the clearer your weakness becomes. You expose what matters to you, and worse, how easily it can be used against you. But here's the nuance. Stoics aren't emotionless. They feel. They just don't flinch. Cold logic doesn't mean you lack heart. It means your head leads your heart. You evaluate before you react. You ask yourself, is this moment worthy of my peace, my time, my energy? If the answer is no, you let it pass like a cloud in the sky. That's not coldness, that's wisdom. When someone insults you or questions your worth, your ego will want to fight, to defend, to be understood. But the Stoic doesn't argue with noise. He doesn't explain himself to chaos. He chooses alignment over attention. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You always own the option of having no opinion." It doesn't mean you're indifferent. It means you protect your energy by refusing to invest in every attack. Look at Oprah Winfrey. Her rise wasn't powered by rage, it was powered by stillness. In rooms where she was doubted, dismissed, and mocked, she did not retaliate. She absorbed, she studied, she strategized, she acted. That quiet power, refusing to react while others expected her to crack, is what made her unshakable and eventually undeniable. This is the Stoic strategy. When they come with heat, you offer ice. When they want a reaction, you give a pause. Because silence creates space, and in that space you regain control, not just of the situation, but of yourself. And when you control yourself, you control the outcome. Here's where it gets dangerous. Emotional reactions feel righteous. The ego says, "You were wronged, defend yourself." But often defending yourself means stooping. It means wasting energy trying to convince someone committed to misunderstanding you. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." And adversity often shows up in the form of provocation. Will you rise by resisting the bait or fall by biting it? Cold logic is not emotional detachment. It is emotional discernment. It means knowing which battles are worth fighting and which are traps disguised as urgency. When someone guilts you into a favor, a reactive person over-explains or argues. But a Stoic simply says, "That doesn't align with my priorities right now." No drama, no debate, just precision. Steve Jobs had many flaws, but when it came to decision-making, he was coldly focused. He didn't entertain ideas out of politeness. If something didn't match his vision, he didn't respond emotionally. He responded decisively. He wasn't cruel. He was clear, and his clarity created a culture of excellence because no one could manipulate his attention. This is the deeper truth. Cold logic is not cruelty. It's self-respect. It means you care about outcomes more than optics. You'd rather be quietly effective than loudly emotional. And once people realize they can't move you with guilt, praise, or provocation, they begin to respect you. Not because you force them to, but because your composure demands it. Let's say someone accuses you of arrogance. Your reflex may be to defend yourself, but a Stoic pauses. He asks, "Is this feedback or projection?" If it's projection, he moves on, because nothing wastes more energy than explaining yourself to someone who's already decided what they want to believe. And the truth is, those who matter don't need explanations, and those who demand them rarely matter. Even in conflict, the man of cold logic wins. He doesn't escalate. He doesn't match volume. He watches. He waits. He speaks when the room is ready to hear. Because in silence, people expose themselves. In restraint, power reveals itself. The one who controls their words controls the temperature of the room. But let's not pretend this is easy. Emotional discipline is forged through repetition. You will fail. You will react. But every time you choose to pause instead of explode, you sharpen your edge. You become less predictable, more measured, more magnetic. Not because you're perfect, but because you're intentional. So when someone next tries to bait you, remember, you don't owe them a reaction. You owe yourself peace. That one pause might save you days of regret. That one silent nod might deliver a message louder than any rebuttal. The Stoics knew, sometimes the best way to defeat chaos is to give it nothing to push against. To sum up, cold logic over emotional reaction isn't about numbing out. It's about showing up aligned. You still feel. But your feelings don't make your choices. You still care. But your care is rooted in reason, not reactivity. And when people realize they can no longer trigger you, they start treating you like a force, not a toy.
Number 3.
Reward loyalty publicly, punish betrayal privately. There is a silent law in human relationships. What you reward gets repeated, and what you tolerate gets normalized. The Stoics understood this not just in theory, but in practice. They believed that leadership isn't about control, it's about clarity, and nothing makes your values more visible than the way you handle loyalty and betrayal. Seneca wrote, "He who spares the guilty harms the good." If you let someone disrespect you, deceive you, or sabotage your work and do nothing, what message are you sending? You're not just sparing the wrongdoer, you're weakening your environment. The people who stood by you, who acted with integrity, who showed up with loyalty, they start to wonder whether it even mattered. That's how standards decay, not from one betrayal, but from tolerated betrayal. But there's a catch. Punishment must be precise, not performative. Machiavelli famously warned, "Injury must be done all at once, so that the blow is felt and then forgotten." When you punish someone publicly, you may win the moment, but you plant seeds of resentment. You attack their ego, and wounded egos don't disappear. They fester, they scheme, they wait. Public punishment breeds long-term problems. The Stoic knows, if it must be done, do it privately, quietly, without humiliation, not to destroy a person, but to make it clear. This line was crossed, and the gate is now closed. At the same time, loyalty must be seen, not just felt, not just assumed. Visible praise is a multiplier. When you publicly acknowledge someone who's been consistent, who's held the line with you, who's done the hard thing when no one was watching, you're not just rewarding them, you're telling everyone around you. This is the kind of person who thrives here. Marcus Aurelius, despite holding absolute power, often used his writings to reflect on the virtues of others, his mentors, his friends, even those he disagreed with. If they were honest, just, or disciplined, he honored it. Why? Because public recognition builds trust. When people feel seen, they stay committed, they rise. You see this in modern leadership too. Howard Schultz of Starbucks often credited frontline baristas and store managers in interviews and speeches. He didn't just thank them in private, he made sure the world saw it. That public gratitude didn't just feel good, it inspired loyalty. People will work harder for a leader who doesn't just demand respect, but returns it when it's earned. Now let's look at the opposite approach. A boss humiliates an employee in a meeting. Maybe they made a mistake, maybe they broke a rule, but instead of correcting them in private, the boss uses them as a warning sign for the rest of the group. And what's the result? Fear, resentment. People start hiding their flaws instead of fixing them. They stop taking initiative, and the person who was called out, they may comply, but the trust is broken permanently. The Stoic avoids this entirely. He never confuses accountability with revenge. When betrayal happens, he doesn't yell, he doesn't gossip, he doesn't seek to be feared, he simply withdraws. He cuts off access. He makes one quiet move that says everything. You no longer belong in this space. No rage, no spectacle, just structure. This is the deeper truth. Betrayal doesn't always need confrontation. Sometimes the greatest consequence is removal. You stop answering, you stop inviting, you stop giving energy. That quiet absence says everything the words never could. And to the person who crossed you, it stings far more than a speech. Meanwhile, loyalty becomes the anchor. When someone stands with you in hard seasons, when they tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable, when they protect your name behind closed doors, you let them know you noticed, not with over-the-top praise, but with honest, thoughtful affirmation. Because in a world full of attention seekers, loyalty is sacred, and sacred things must be guarded. But don't misunderstand. This isn't about manipulation. It's not transactional. It's about values. You don't reward loyalty to buy people. You do it to honor the rare. You don't punish betrayal because it hurts your ego. You do it because it threatens your standard. The Stoic doesn't take betrayal personally, he takes it structurally. If something no longer fits, he removes it, quietly, permanently. This level of control builds an aura. People begin to sense that your approval is earned, not handed out, that your inner circle is tight, not desperate, and that while you are calm, you are not naive. You don't chase, you don't beg, you filter. And that filtration is how you maintain order, even in chaos. To live this principle fully, you need clarity and courage. You must resist the urge to react, resist the urge to seek applause, correct in silence, reward with strength, and above all, stay consistent. Let your actions be so clear that people begin to predict them. When your consequences are quiet but consistent, your respect becomes automatic. To summarize, reward loyalty in the light so that those who live with virtue know they are seen. Punish betrayal in the dark so that order is restored without noise. And do both not from emotion, but from principle. Because in a world of chaos, your calm structure is not only rare, it's unforgettable.
Number 4.
Lead through discipline. The loudest man in the room is rarely the one in charge. Real leadership begins not with commands, but with conduct. It's not your words that shape the room, it's your presence. And your presence is nothing more than a reflection of your discipline. The Stoics didn't chase authority. They became so internally ordered, so self-governed, that people gravitated toward their structure. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, began each day not by planning his influence, but by sharpening his discipline. In Meditations, he wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." In other words, the foundation of leadership is self-regulation, not control over others, but command over self. But discipline isn't about waking up at 5 a.m. or cold showers. It's not about rigid routines for the sake of aesthetics. It's about alignment. It's the consistent choice to do what is necessary over what is easy, to show up when no one's watching, to think clearly when everyone else is reacting, to walk with integrity even when no reward is guaranteed. This is what people feel when they're around someone truly disciplined. You don't have to say, "I'm focused." They sense it, your body language speaks it, your choices reinforce it, and your consistency proves it. The Stoic understands this. Credibility is not built in declarations, it is built in patterns, and patterns are formed through daily discipline. Now let's take a modern lens. Consider Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL, author, leadership consultant. But what truly makes him powerful is not his resume, it's his routine. He posts a photo of his watch every morning, 4:30 a.m. The caption is always the same: discipline equals freedom. He doesn't need to shout about leadership, he shows it. People follow those who live what they say, not those who preach what they won't do. This is the paradox of discipline. The more structured you become, the freer you are. Because once your actions are no longer dictated by mood or external pressure, you reclaim your power. The Stoics called this prohairesis, the inner faculty that chooses what is up to you. It's your will, your reason, your sovereignty. And every time you act from it instead of impulse, you fortify your authority, not over others, but over yourself. When others see you consistently act from principle rather than convenience, they begin to trust you, not just professionally, but energetically. Your presence becomes safe, predictable in the best sense, not boring, but stable, and stability in a chaotic world is magnetic. But discipline isn't just about work ethic, it's about restraint. knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to pursue and when to withdraw. The disciplined man is not in a hurry. He is not desperate because he has trained himself to respond, not to react. And that is where respect begins, not in achievement, but in equanimity. Let's look at Warren Buffett. He's one of the richest men alive. But what makes him revered is his self-restraint. He doesn't jump on every opportunity. He doesn't chase trends. He waits, he studies, he thinks independently. While others panic, he holds his position. That's not just intelligence, that's discipline. And because of it, people trust his decisions, even when they don't understand them in the moment. This is the kind of power that doesn't need volume. It doesn't need to dominate the room. It radiates silently. The disciplined man walks in and doesn't have to assert himself because his habits have already done the talking. Now here's where most people fall. They want the benefits of discipline without the identity of discipline. They try for a week, a month, then quit when the world doesn't applaud. But the Stoic doesn't train for applause. He trains for alignment. He shows up daily not because it feels good, but because it's who he is. That's the difference between a performer and a leader. One works for recognition, the other works from principle. And when you lead through discipline, you naturally command respect, and you don't demand it because others see in you what they lack in themselves. Consistency, patience, precision. You become the reference point for what's possible when chaos is replaced with clarity. This kind of leadership lasts. It doesn't need a title. It doesn't need a platform. It needs only proof. And that proof is in the repetition, day after day, choice after choice. Not perfect, but principled, not rigid, but resolute. Let's take an example from creativity. Ryan Holiday, a student of Stoicism, writes every day. Not when inspiration strikes, every day. Through it, he has authored books that have reached millions. But it's not talent alone. It's the discipline to sit, think, write, and refine. Whether or not the world is watching, that's a Stoicism in motion. Doing the work, detached from outcome, committed to process. To lead through discipline, you don't have to be extreme, you just have to be consistent. And that consistency builds a kind of quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need to correct others, because its very existence corrects the environment. To summarize, lead through discipline not to impress others, but to stabilize yourself. Show up daily, align your habits with your values. Become so structured that people stop questioning your authority. Not because you say the right things, but because you live them. Discipline doesn't control others, it commands yourself. And that's the only kind of leadership that lasts.
Number 5.
Consistency. Of all the traits that build long-term respect, none is more underestimated or more feared than consistency, because consistency makes you undeniable, predictable in principle, unshakable under pressure, and in a world addicted to novelty and distraction, a consistent man becomes rare. And what is rare is respected. The Stoics place consistency at the heart of virtue. Why? Because it's the only way you can trust yourself. You can't lead others if your standards shift with your emotions. You can't inspire trust if your values only apply when they're convenient. Epictetus warned, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." And the only way to embody it is through repetition, through action that doesn't fluctuate when the weather does, or when the mood does, or when people stop watching. Most people think power comes from moments of brilliance. One big win, one clever speech, one performance. But real power is boring. It's daily, it's silent. It's built in the dark when no one is clapping. When the disciplined choice gets made again, and again and again, until people stop wondering what you'll do next and start depending on it. This is why inconsistency is dangerous. It breaks trust, not just with others, but with yourself. The person who says they'll show up and doesn't teaches themselves not to believe in their own word. And when your word becomes unreliable, your presence loses weight, your boundaries become negotiable, your values start to blur. Eventually, people don't take you seriously, not because they dislike you, but because they can't rely on you. Now let's turn to real-world evidence. Think about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. His success isn't built on being the most talented actor or the most charismatic speaker. It's built on the most basic, brutal force: consistency. He trains every day. He promotes every project. He shows up when others quit. Whether it's a 4 a.m. workout or a 16-hour shoot, he repeats himself with such discipline that his very name communicates reliability. He's a brand not because he's flashy, but because he's steady. That's what consistency gives you, a reputation. And reputations become force fields. People begin to shape their behavior around your standards, not because you demand it, but because your patterns make it inevitable. This is what the Stoics understood. Marcus Aurelius didn't write meditations to impress anyone. He wrote it every day, to himself, a record, a reminder, a mirror, because he knew that the human mind forgets, it drifts, it rationalizes, and the only way to stay aligned with virtue is to return again and again to what matters. That is consistency, not perfection, but return. And here's the irony. When you're consistent, people stop focusing on your mistakes because they trust your trajectory. They know you'll fix it. They know you'll stay the course. You don't have to be flawless. You just have to be faithful to your path. That's why Stoicism isn't about being emotionless. It's about being unchanging in principle. Whether praised or mocked, loved or betrayed, promoted or overlooked, the Stoic remains aligned because his code is not a performance, it's a lifestyle. Let's take another example. Jerry Seinfeld, known for his decades-long success as a comedian, but even more respected for one habit: writing jokes every single day, not when inspired, not when paid. Every day he calls it, "Don't break the chain." This simple, invisible routine built him an empire. He didn't try to be amazing every time. He just never let the momentum die. And that, over time, did more for his legacy than talent ever could. So why do so many people resist consistency? Because it's not exciting. It doesn't offer immediate results. You won't get applause. You won't feel different after day 1 or even day 10. Consistency demands faith, discipline, and most of all, identity. You have to stop seeing yourself as someone who tries and start becoming someone who does, not once, but as a default, as a non-negotiable. And here's where most people collapse. They make discipline a challenge, a 30-day sprint, a resolution, but the Stoic makes it a rule, a pattern. He doesn't say, "I'll try to do it tomorrow." He says, "This is who I am now." And that identity, if held long enough, transforms everything around him. People start mirroring his structure, environments start adapting to his clarity, and respect becomes the natural consequence. Not because he asked for it, but because he earned it. Consistency is also how you enforce boundaries without saying a word. If someone crosses a line and you respond the same way every time, without drama, without variation, they learn fast. You don't need to lecture. You don't need to raise your voice. You just act predictably. And that predictability becomes your protection. It becomes your power. But the ultimate reward of consistency is internal. You begin to trust yourself. You stop negotiating with laziness. You stop seeking motivation. You become reliable to the one person who matters most. You. That's self-respect. It bleeds into everything, the way you walk, the way you listen, the way you lead, and people can feel it. So, lead with consistency, not to prove anything to others, but to align your life with what you say you value. Whether you're speaking to a crowd or sitting in silence, let your daily actions say, "This is who I am." That steadiness is not boring, it's rare, and what is rare becomes respected. To summarize, consistency builds character. It cements boundaries, it earns trust, and it creates presence. If people know what to expect from you, not in mood but in principle, you become unshakable. In the noise of inconsistency, you become a frequency of stability, and that is the highest signal of all. When you stop trying to be nice and start becoming principled, everything changes. You're no longer seeking approval, you're commanding respect through boundaries, through silence, through action. That's what Stoicism teaches. Not how to be liked, but how to be anchored. Not how to please others, but how to become immune to their chaos. You don't need to yell, you don't need to explain. You just need to live your standards so consistently that people begin to correct themselves in your presence. If this message hit you deeply, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, live it, and subscribe to this channel so you don't forget who you're becoming. Because when you stop being nice and start living by code, the weak fall away, the fake reveal themselves, and the world finally sees who you really are. And that is the beginning of true power.